Hi, my name is Jai Walker, and I'll be presenting on the breaking down of Joker's disorder. So, for my introduction, I would say that I've chosen the movie Joker, directed and produced by Todd Phillips. The movie follows the life of a man who seems to have a lot of downfalls in his life. He constantly is being bullied and laughed at by everyone that he encounters in his life. He has these big dreams of being a stand-up comedian, but he just seems to lack the natural ability to truly engage with his audience, probably due to the fact that, he suffers from this disorder. And he also suffers from a medical condition that makes him laugh uncontrollably. So it makes situations awkward at times in his life. And he's seen as like an outcast for the most part. And he can't seem to, he has these dreams and these visions and fantasies of like success in his career and even his love life, but he can't seem to make those things a reality. So ultimately, the like movie goes on and shows all these downfalls in his life, and eventually it gets to a point where he doesn't take it anything anymore. He's like done with people treating him the way that they treat him. Even with him having this disorder, like people don't seem to care. And so he starts acting out and becoming the antagonist of the story. And really the message of the thing was it's like how the system fails people who have mental disorders. And it just shows the development of how if like you're not nice to somebody or you don't know what that person's going through, it can ultimately cost you your life or be like a make or break decision in your life to where they could be driven to kill or just not do good things based off of the way people treat them. So then, the main character that I am talking about, his name is Arthur Fleck, aka the Joker. And it doesn't specifically state like his age in the movie, but after doing further research, he's about around 30 years old. He works as a clown for just different things around the city. He gets hired for different gigs as a clown, but unfortunately, one of his downfalls was he was fired for bringing a gun to the children's hospital that was like given to him by one of his coworkers, but obviously he doesn't have a good rapport with his coworkers because he makes them feel weird or awkward and they don't like being around him or working with him. So they make fun of him a lot. If besides like one person, but majority of them all make fun of him and see him as an outcast. Um, he ultimately ends up getting fired, and that also is like one of the downfalls in his story. So then he ends up murdering three Wall Street guys, and that's where his story really took went downhill and took a really bad turn. And then we just slowly see him turn into this criminal mastermind we famously know as the Joker throughout the movie. It's basically the Joker's origin story. So his chief complaint when he's going to therapy and he goes to therapy, he talks about his problems. He basically says that he feels lonely, isolated. He feels like nobody seems to notice him. And in his last session with his therapist in the movie, he basically says that all he ever has are negative thoughts, as shown by like the depiction on the screen. And as it unfolds during the as the movie unfolds through his behaviors and his delusions, it starts to indicate that he does suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. According to the DSM, narcissistic personality disorder is described as a persuasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. It usually begins in early adulthood and presents in various other like contexts. So, in order for somebody to be diagnosed for this, they have to at least meet 5 out of the 9 criterion that align with the disorder. He happens to meet exactly 5 out of the 9 criterion that meets the disorder. He aligns with criterion 1, 2, 4, 5, and 7. The first criterion states that individuals with this disorder have a grandiose sense of self-importance. And so in the movie, the examples I was able to come with was his like desire to be a stand-up comedian, and that in the movie he constantly craves that public attention, and he imagines himself on TV all the time. Every time he watches TV, he's always having these visions and fantasies of himself being on TV, doing his stand-up acts, and like being praised for what he does. But in reality, that's not usually how it really turns out. Criterion two, individuals with narcissistic personality disorder are often occupied with the fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. So an example of this was it shows him being obsessed with this one particular female character in the movie. Her name is Sophia, and she's his neighbor, and she's a single mother. And he constantly has all these different they show like all these different dates and like instances where he's interacting with her, but towards the end of the film it's revealed that none of those were real, and it was all up in his head that they had this kind of romantic relationship going on, but in reality they have never interacted romantically ever, and it's all just been all his fantasies and delusions of what his ideal love with her would be. He meets criterion four, which is individuals with this disorder generally require excessive admiration. Throughout the movie, all he ever wants is attention and to be noticed and to be visible and seen by people. But he seems to feel like nobody notices his existence and that like nobody cares if he were to live or die. But throughout the movie, you could tell he constantly wants and craves attention, especially with him wanting to be a stand-up comedian. That's all they ever want is attention and admiration for the work that they do. So yeah, and then criteria five is a sense of entitlement and is evident in these individuals, unreasonable expectations of specifically favorable treatment. So one of the main things was his visions that he has of like being a successful stand-up comedian on TV. On all his visions, he's successful and he makes the crowd laugh and they love his act. But in reality, when it actually happens and he actually gets on TV and is able to do his act, he fails like really badly in front of a live studio audience, and they don't agree with the joke he tells. It's too dark humor for them. It's not even really funny. So then he slowly starts to get frustrated and is puzzled with why he's not receiving all this praise and attention that he usually gets in his head. But in reality, that's not usually what ends up happening. Criteria seven, which is the last one, is individuals with narcissistic personality disorder originally have a lack of empathy and difficulty recognizing desires, subjective experiences, and feelings of others. So there's multiple examples of this, starting with when he ends up killing those three Wall Street men. He kind of doesn't feel any remorse for doing that. He kind of justifies it as they were horrible men and that they were making fun of him for his condition. So they got what they basically deserved. He kind of admits that to the clerk in one of the scenes where he visits Arkham State Hospital. And he basically ends up saying that he doesn't didn't ended up not bothering him as much that he did that. But the clerk didn't know what he was talking about, but obviously the audience knows that he killed those men, and he basically admitted that he had no remorse for it. Then when he finds out that his mom is actually not his real mom, but his foster parent, then he acts out and ends up smothering her with a pillow. And after his ex like co-workers come by and like share their condolences for his mom's passing, he kind of expresses how her passing didn't affect him, and that he doesn't really feel any remorse or like any sadness for her passing. He was really just celebrating that she died. Of course they don't know that he's the killer, but it just ultimately shows that he still shows no empathy. And I think the last scene would be when He's a guest on the show, and he ends up telling, like I mentioned, he was telling a really bad dark humor joke on live television. He gets frustrated and upset minute by minute, and eventually it gets to the point where he's so angry and upset that he ends up shooting the TV show host in the head, ultimately killing him. And after that happens, he just sits there and laughs and doesn't show any remorse. And he also goes up to the television host again and shoots him in the chest. He's already dead, but he just does that for no apparent reason. And he seems to not care that he just killed somebody on live television and doesn't really think about the consequences to his actions, that he did that in front of a national audience. So the history, we come to find out that it's revealed in the movie that he is actually not related to the woman who he thought was his mother. And that as a little boy, he was abused by one of her boyfriends. And that she just kind of stood and let that happen to her child. So then she ultimately gets like in trouble for endangering her child, and like she ends up getting committed to a hospital for her own problems. It's revealed that um she also has narcissistic personality disorder, and she has other like delusions of grandiosity herself, where she claims that her son is the son of Thomas Wayne, which is this big famous guy that in the movie he is Bruce Wayne, aka like Batman's father, but she claims that that is also his father. So she already has her own issues, and throughout the movie there's not much to go off of history wise with his life. It's just certain things and bits and pieces that are revealed that kind of show how his progression to this point, how he got to the point he's at, basically. So she described him as a happy little boy, so there's no like evidence that he showed any signs of like being the way he is now when he was younger, but it progressively got to the point where he's showing signs and symptoms as he's gotten older. So my treatment and diagnosis for him for narcissistic personality disorder, there's only one treatment, and it's called psychotherapy or talk therapy, which is something he already goes through while going to a therapist. He's already talking about his problems and being able to express to her like the issues he's having, and he's able to just get those out and express them. But ultimately in the movie, he's that ends up being cut short because of lack of funding from Gotham City, and it ends up being really bad for him that he has no longer anyone to talk to or prescribe him medication. So he ends up getting off his medication or not taking it anymore. And ultimately that progresses and he ends up getting worse and worse and becomes even more violent and vindictive and ultimately just goes crazy. But also it says that narcissistic personality disorder isn't curable, while medicine helps with symptoms of like depression, and like antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicine helps with keeping those emotions at bay and those feelings and symptoms at bay. It doesn't really solve the problem. So there's no known cure for what he has, and it's like a lifelong condition that he would have to deal with anyway. It doesn't matter if he does therapy, it helps a little bit. He takes the medication, it helps, but it's not getting rid of the problem ultimately. Here is a clip that I found that kind of shows his different like the criterion that he meets for this disorder.
My life is nothing but a comedy.
Let me get this straight. You think that killing those guys is funny?
I do. And I'm tired of pretending it's not. Comedy is subjective. I killed those guys because they were awful. Everybody is awful these days. It's enough to make anyone crazy.
So that's it, you're crazy. That's your defense for killing 3 young men?
No, they couldn't carry a tune to save their lives. Oh, why is everybody so upset about these guys? If it was me dying on the sidewalk, you'd walk right over me. I pass you every day and you don't notice me. But these guys, what, because Thomas Wayne, we cried about them on TV?
You're laughing. You're laughing. Someone was killed today because of what you did.
I know. How about another joke, Ray?
No, I think we've had enough of your jokes.
What do you get
I don't think so.
when you cross
I think
a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash?
The police.
I'm telling you what you get.
Call the police.
Get what you fucking deserve.
So that seems a little graphic, but it basically shows that he has a problem. So then in the next one, I'm basically breaking down what happened. So at the beginning, it's showing how he meets Criterion 2 with what I mentioned. He has all these fantasies and different dates that he has with Sophia, but they aren't real. And it ends up showing that all those times that he thought he was talking to her, nobody was standing there. It was all in his imagination. So yeah, that was crazy. Then at the end, when he's so frustrated and nobody's laughing at his jokes, he starts getting all defensive and explaining how his crimes and stuff that he admits on the show were justified because they were terrible and that society treats him badly. So he's just doing what he thinks is right and just. So yeah, he just thinks everything's fine. So he ends up killing, and after that you don't see what he does after he shoots the Murray Franklin, who is the television host he ends up killing, but he ends up sitting there and just starts laughing. So it's showing that he really has no empathy for his victims and that he doesn't care that anything bad's happening to them. And yeah, it's a really crazy way of showing this, but yeah, he has some problems, and it's evident through that video clip, through that short video clip that he shows the signs of having narcissistic personality disorder. Then here are all my references, and thank you for listening.